So now that we know kind of the basic types of data, we're going to look at the different data models that are available in R. One thing that's kind of confusing if you work in different languages is there's a lot of common data structures, but they're not always given the same name. So if you're, for example, a Python user, you might not use the term vector in the same way that it's used in R, for example. Okay, so a vector is effectively just a single value or a single character or a single boolean or a list of characters, booleans, or whatnot. The way this is a function that you're going to see in R a lot, and it's this C function, which stands for combine. So this allows you to combine a bunch of objects like into a list. So let's play around a bit with that. So here we go. Here we go, making a couple vectors. So this is a vector of numeric values. So again, we're just putting them in the combine function, and we're combining these series of values into a vector. In Python, this is what you might consider like a list, but we call them vectors in R. And just as a side note, if a vector only holds one value, like just one, then we would call it a scalar, but they're basically treated the same. And here we have a vector of character value, or characters, right? So they're all in quotes. And here we have a vector of booleans, and then I'm just printing them. So let's just run this real quick so you can see that. Expand this a bit. So there's our vector of numbers, our vectors of strings, and our vector of booleans. Now, just as a quick note, if you go over here to your environments, the vectors are all going to show up underneath of this values subsection, and we'll see some other subsections later as we produce things like like functions and data frames and whatnot. Okay, just as a quick note before we move on to this, you can feed in other objects into a vector. So for example, I could do something like x is equal to 1, y is equal to 2, z is equal to 3, and then I could combine those into what's called vec1, and we'll just do vec1 c, and then we just feed it x, y, and z. So there we have a numeric vector with 3 values. So if I call vec1, we get back those 3 values. Okay, cool. So the next thing we're going to look at is just indices for vectors. Now, this is another issue if you're used to other programming languages. Most programming languages index starting at 0, but our index is starting at 1, which actually for me makes a lot more sense. So I actually think, So anyway, if it might be a little confusing if you're not used to this, but I actually find it's actually more intuitive if you're not used to doing this in another language. So for example, in a vector of with 10 values in it, the first one has an index of 1, the second one has an index of 2, so on and so forth. Okay, so let's just look at this. So I have this vector y, which I believe is still this. Yeah, so this is vector y. And we're just going to pull out some stuff. So this is going to pull out the value at the second index, which in this case should be spatial. And this is going to pull out 3 through 5. So that should be, let me see, spatial analytics R. And then this is going to pull out 1, 3, 5. Note whenever the indices are not contiguous, you can use the combine function here to wrap them together. So this is a single index. This is a range of indexes using a colon. This is a series of indices that are not that have gaps, right? So 1, 3, 5 as opposed to 1, 2, 3. And this is kind of a combination. So we have 1, skip 2, and then 3 through 6. So if we print those, we can see what we get back. Oops. I must have not saved this. Oh, that's right. I overwrote y. Yeah, so anyway, let me run this. So second index, third, fourth, fifth index, first, third, fifth index, first index, 3, 4, 5, 6, right? Another issue, difference, if you're used to Python, is here the last index is maintained. In Python, you go from the first index to up to the last, but not including the last. So here you go from first clear up to last, including the last, which is a bit different. Okay, so that's a vector. Again, if you're Python, you can kind of think of that as a list. It's just like a series of numbers or character strings or values or whatnot. Let's do a quick experiment before we move on. Let's see if we can make a vector with different data types. So we'll do like 1, yes, true, and 3. So we have 2 numbers, a string, and a boolean. Let's see what it does. Okay, it did print all those, but see what it did is it just converted them all into string. So, in Python, if you work with lists, you can't have lists with different types of values at each position. In R, when you have a vector, it's just going to convert everything into the same type, which is important to note, I think. So anyway, that's that.